G'day everyone, I'm your host Stephen, and welcome to the Bamboo History Podcast. Today's episode will be a bit different because this is more of an end of year episode where I'll wrap up for the year, talk about my thoughts, reflections, and tell you all what's in store for 2023. Last week's episode 40, was actually our podcast's final full-length episode for the year. It has been a journey so far, and I wanted to thank each and every one of you for tuning in to my podcast. First off, I wanted to say that it has been super busy, just recording, editing, researching, drawing pictures for my podcast Instagram, reaching out to people for interviews, and so on and so forth. So I'm actually super tired. It's been pretty full on, and I'm really glad I made it to the end of 2022. For those of you who know me personally, you probably already know this, but Chinese and East Asian history has been one of my passions since I was a kid, and I'm glad I've started a podcast talking about it. And I know for some of you who have tuned into my episodes, you've gotten back to me saying that, you've loved my episodes, you've loved the content, you've learned something new. To those people, I say thanks, and I hope I've done my best in educating something new to all of you. One of the best things about starting this podcast was that it's also educated me as well. Before I started this podcast, I used to read a lot about Chinese and East Asian history as a hobby. But after starting this podcast, not only have I had to do all of that, but I've actually had to do in-depth research to write my scripts for my episodes. And through that in-depth research, I've actually learned a lot more about Chinese and East Asian history than I've done before. So for me, it's been really fruitful as well. I've learned so much more about Chinese and East Asian history since starting this podcast. I guess, even though I love doing this podcast and I love Chinese history, it becomes a grind as well. I think with life, even if it's something you're passionate about, if you do it over and over again, it does become a bit of a grind. And this is where I have to thank each and every one of you who have either DM'd me through my Instagram, sent me an email, commented on my YouTube videos, or for those who know me in person, personally given me positive feedback. All of this stuff has really motivated me. And I sometimes think to myself, even if it was just one person, just one listener who was looking forward to my episode every week, I would record that episode just for that one person. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you to everyone who's reached out to me with positive comments. One of the biggest challenges I've faced recording this podcast has actually been scheduling interviews. I don't know if other podcasters have had this similar experience, but finding people to interview is very, very difficult, especially for a topic like Chinese history. You'd think the main source of people that I can interview are, history professors and academics. But I've actually found it very difficult to find these people to interview. And the people that I've reached out to, a lot of people have actually said no to me. I find that quite disheartening, and it's probably because, and this might not be true, might not be entirely accurate, but I believe that some academics, some professors, have a certain, view against amateur historians, which is quite understandable, right? Professors, lecturers, PhD students, they've studied the degree, they've gone through years and years of training, and they're officially qualified, right? And then to see some person like me, and I'll admit, I've never studied history at university, and I've never gotten a degree, start talking about history in front of everyone. They might feel that it's kind of, essentially I'm an amateur, I'm not qualified. And they might harbour some sort of view against that, in that, I'm probably not qualified to talk about what I talk about. And to that I say, look, each to their own. I believe, personally, history is all about telling stories of the past to the people of the present, so we can understand what happened in the past, right? And that's what I'm doing, and I believe I am carrying that mission of delivering Chinese and East Asian history. So I say to those historians or academics who don't believe in what amateur historians are doing in terms of podcasting, we should be sharing each other's load in telling stories of the past to people of the present. But yeah, so that's been one of my challenges and probably one of my biggest challenges of this podcast so far, get people to do interviews. So I'm guessing you're all probably wondering, what's happening to this podcast? Where's it going? Well, at the moment, I'm going to take a 1.5 month break because, it's Christmas and New Year and I want to take time off and I want to rest as well because I am human, I'm not a cyborg. But it's not entirely a break. I am going to use that time to do research and further readings for my future episodes, and I will be back in February 2023. Remember that, February 2023. During that break period, I'm also going to probably try and post some Instagram stories or content, some extra history content, just to engage with people, and I'm going to figure out new ways to promote my podcast. But rest assured, 2023 is going to be another great year, full of exciting Chinese history content, and hopefully more content about East Asian history broadly as well, like, as I've done previously, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, Mongolian, and history of countries that neighbor China. Because throughout my research doing this podcast, I've learnt so much about history of these other countries that I've really wanted to learn more about these other countries as well. So yeah, stay tuned for 2023, guys. It's going to be exciting. And lastly, before I go, I just wanted to share a quick story with you that hopefully you can get some inspiration out of. So this story is based off an ancient Chinese saying called Yu Gong Yi Shan, spelt YUGONGYISHAN, and in English literally means the fool moves the mountain. So this story talks about this, I think he's like 90 years old, a 90-year-old Chinese grandpa. At the place where he lives, there's two massive mountains in front of his farmland, and these two massive mountains block his way from going to the outside world. And in order to go to the outside world, he has to sort of circumnavigate the mountains, which take ages. So he says to himself, I'm going to move these mountains into another place so that I can get a better way out to the outside world. And so he gets some farming tools and starts chipping away at the mountain, the rocks one by one, one by one. And the people look at him and they're like, have you seen these mountains, mate? They're massive. How are you going to move them by yourself? And Yu Gong, the old grandpa, Mr. Fool, says, I know this is going to be a hard job, guys, but I'm determined to do it, even if it takes so long that I die, because I believe my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren will continue this mission to move these mountains. And so every day, day in, day out, he chips away at the rocks, trying to move the mountains so he can create a path out of his home to the outside world. And the heavens, the gods, so touched by his perseverance, determination, and just that never say die attitude, become moved by what he does, and they move the mountains for him. The most important takeaway of this story, I guess, is to never give up, and to keep persevering at what you do, even if what you want to do, even if that end goal seems impossible and way out of reach, because eventually you'll get there. And that's kind of how I feel about my podcast right now. I mean, there's still so many things I need to do. There's so much people out there that I still want to reach out to. And there's still so much room the podcast has to grow. But I say this to all of you right now, all your listeners. This is something that I'm not going to give up easily on. And I'm going to keep trying and trying until I finally achieve my end goal and start reaching out to people who really want to learn about Chinese history. So yeah, enough of me talking. That was my end of year message. Thank you all listeners for tuning in this year. Have a wonderful Christmas and Happy New Year. And see you all back on the Bamboo History Podcast in February 2023. Bye for now.